When did you figure out you were a writer?
So if you let my nana boo, Sarah Pearl, tell you, she said I've been writing my whole life. I don't know, I guess the first time I thought I was a writer is in Albany in 1994, there was the flood. It was the big flood of 94, and I wasn't living in Albany at the time. I was just doing like, you know, the summer visits. And I went to go visit, and I didn't really understand why we couldn't go to some of the usual places that we went because everything was still underwater. And I was like, oh, y'all can just like, you know, mop up the water and we just make it work. And my grandparents were like, no, that's not how it works. So they literally took me out into the city and showed me these places that were flooded. And, you know, we talked to people that we knew, and I was asking, like, you know, what happened? And I talked to some of my friends. My friends were like, yeah, we having, like, you know, we're kids, we're like 10. So it was like, yeah, we keep having all these sleepovers and all the cousins at the house. And so I got home, and I just started typing. Like, I saw this, I saw this, I was thinking about this made me sad, this made me wonder why. And I remember when it was time for me to go back home to Virginia, I was scared that the flood was gonna keep me in Albany and I was gonna miss my flight out of Atlanta. And I was scared there was gonna be like another big flood. So that was then, and then I was bullied really bad in middle school. So I would write these short stories kind of as an escape. And then, you know, I got to high school and I still was doing the writing thing. I called myself a, you know, a poet, I guess. And, you know, I also still did spoken word in like undergrad at Albany State, and, you know, then graduate school happened and all of that went out the window. It was nothing but academic writing. And then I finished the dissertation, and I just felt like part of myself was missing, and that what was missing was the creative part. I've been a creative, that's how I got my start, and I just wanted to reclaim that. So, you know, that's how the short story started. I just started writing every morning for like 30 minutes, and like for the first 6 weeks, it was just, I don't know what the hell to say. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. And then it's weird. My great-grandfather was murdered. He was lynched. And, you know, my grandmother doesn't talk about it because Southern black folks, especially old Southern black folks, don't talk about the stuff that pains them. And I decided to write his story. And I just wrote a story from his perspective, and that's how it started. That's how I, you know, so I have to thank the ancestors for that. They were looking out for me. They're like, you want your creative voice back, and they gave it to me, and I'm trying to keep it.
Let's roll with that ancestor piece for a moment, because I'd like to think we all, in one way or another, are always in conversation with our ancestors. But you do so very publicly. I mean, most folks, you know, who are checking you on Facebook and other forms of social media, you know, there's a lot of references to your Nana Boo Boo and.
Nana Boo is all the things. Like, you know, don't let the PhD and Harvard fellowship fool. I would throw hands and go to jail for my grandma. You know what I'm saying? So I moved to Albany, and that's why 2018 is super special for me, is because it's 20 years since I moved to Albany for good, and I moved with my grandparents, and they were my gateway to what Southern is and what it's not. So on the one hand, I have my grandparents who were like, you know, they came up in Jim Crow era. So, you know, my grandmother's from Leary, Georgia, right? My grandfather is from Clark County, Athens. And they would tell me these stories, right, about how they grew up. Like, yeah, we couldn't do this. Like, you know, my grandmother was like, we went to go see Gone with the Wind. And they had to go in the balcony because the balcony was the only place that black folks could sit.
Nigger heaven.
Yeah, you know. My grandma, she too conservative for that. She'll just be like, the N-word heaven. And my granddad was he was a star football player, and the University of Georgia wouldn't give him the time of day because he was black. Right. So I have a hate-hate relationship with the Bulldogs. And they paid for my grandmother to go to NYU to stay segregated. Like, they literally paid for her to go to NYU. So I'm just like, okay. But no, I feel like the older that I get, being able to acknowledge like this kind of ancestral ambition is what keeps me grounded in what I'm trying to do.
You are a Southern woman.
All day.
grown Southern woman.
As hell.
We know from just our own experiences and experienced folks who came before us and the folks coming behind us, you're in a profession that can take your spirit, take your heart, beat you up, make you want to separate from who you are in order to navigate this space. You look like ain't none of Gina Mae leaving anytime soon, that you're still fully Gina Mae up in these classrooms and having to wage the wars that you need to wage. Is there a price for that?
I paid the price when I went to graduate school. Anybody who's ever gone through anything graduate school can tell you that anybody, not saying that graduate school is a walk in the park for anybody, but especially as a black woman, there were many a times I was like, I'm not even gonna do this. I felt like I paid the price. You know, my grandfather had been diagnosed with leukemia, but he also had congenital heart failure and diabetes, so he had the big three. And Tallahassee is 90 minutes from Albany, and he went to the ICU for 68 days. And my grandmother was like, you know, could you come and sit with him while I took a break? Because she had her own doctor appointments. And I was like, all day, you don't even have to ask me. And I had a professor who pulled me aside and was like, I need to talk to you after class. I'm like, cool. And the professor was telling me, you know, I'm concerned because I feel like you're not taking your studies seriously. And I was like, no, I am. I'm just dealing with a sick grandfather who's like a father to me. He's like a father to me. And she told me, she said, well, he's just your grandfather. So then, you know, doctoral student Regina got pushed to the side, and Gina Mae came out and was like, first of all, I wouldn't be in your little funky ass program if my grandfather didn't tell me that I was gonna be a PhD. And if my grandfather needs me to come and sit with him while he's in the ICU unit, then that's where I'm going to be. So of course she had a whole red face going on, and I'm just like, you already said it, it's whatever. And you know, and then my father-in-law got sick. So, you know, Roy's dad got sick, and he was in Gainesville at the University of Florida. He was at Shands Hospital. And then his mother got sick. So we were bouncing back and forth between Tallahassee, Valdosta, and Gainesville. And his father passed my second semester of doctoral studies. And then my grandfather passed 6 months later. And then I was also studying for preliminary exams. So graduate school didn't give me time to grieve. And I was commuting from Atlanta to Tallahassee twice a month to stay on track with my dissertation. So I didn't finish in 4 years, I finished in 5. And by the time I got down there, and I mean, like, I did the defense, you know what I'm saying? And they were like, you know, come in with your peers. Like, that was the first time I was acknowledged as like Dr. Bradley. That's when I grieved. I adjuncted for like 5 years. I ain't had no money, none of that. But I'm like trying to go to these conferences, like I'm trying to keep up face, right? I'm writing my ass off.
No, I remember ASA in Baltimore.
Man, I struggled to pay that $36 parking. You don't understand.
We did the panel, like, and we talking about we're gonna go, you know, get some drinks and hang out and all this kind of stuff. And you like, I gotta drive back.
Gotta drive back.
Excuse me?
I ain't got it. I had to put all my money went to parking that day. I parked at the hotel. It was $36. I'll never forget. It was $36 to park, and everybody was kicking it. And I was like, okay, I'll go get some water. Everybody else was like drinking. I mean, like, that's the first time I met Treva, and we was like, yeah. Treva paid for my breakfast that day, and I was so thankful because breakfast, she was eating at the hotel. She had her little tenure track money, and I was over here struggling, and I was like, so she was like, aren't you going to eat something? And I'm looking at the prices like, so some hash browns really is $7 at this hotel? And I'm like, no, I'm straight.
Where the Waffle House at?
And she was like, no. So she like paid for it. So thank you, Treva B. You're still struggling. Yeah, and I adjuncted. I mean, like, nobody would hire me. And I had what a lot of adjuncts have. I had the receipts. I was doing all of these things. And so the final time I got on the market, I was desperate. I was so desperate. I was like, okay, I'm just going to apply to any and everything, which my husband didn't like. He was like, we staying in Atlanta. And I was like, Atlanta ain't hiring at the moment. And this little $500 a month that I'm getting ain't paying no bills. You know what I'm saying? And Sally Mae, no, Navient is now like, so we heard you got this degree. Congratulations. Where my money? Where my money at? And didn't get the job. So I was like, you know what, whatever. And it was you and Emden who were like, why haven't you applied for the Harvard Fellowship? And I was like, the Harvard? What? Psh, I barely can afford living here. What makes you think I'm gonna be able to go to Boston? And I was desperate. I was just like, cool, whatever. So I applied. And then I had also just finished up Outcasted Conversations. And I decided, well, maybe my first book should be on Outcast. And I submitted my little introduction and book prospectus, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But UNC was like, cool, we're gonna publish that. And then, the good news finally started rolling in. So I got the book contract in January, I got my first tenure track offer, and I finally feel like this is my first year I'm actually making it, enjoying it. Like, call me Dr. Bradley. I never get tired of that, but yes, I just feel like I finally kind of made it just now.
Do you find that there are a lot of your colleagues, the story that you just told is not unfamiliar to some of us?
Nope.
But it's also not like water cooler conversations with some of our colleagues. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? And I could just look into the audience and point to a few of y'all and know what these conversations look like. The invisible trauma that's associated with what people perceive as making it. Mm-hmm. What I know about black professors is that, most of us are a paycheck and a half away from, the working class and poor people we supposedly left back in the hood. Mm-hmm. There's always, right, up cousin Pookie, right? And this ain't just black academics, right? This is the black middle class story. Cousin Pookie, cousin Nene, need to pay their light bill this month, need to get out of jail this month, got parking tickets in the car, got towed, right? I mean, that's real, right? Even if we're a step out of it, right? We still have real deep connectors to people who's still in it, and sometimes generationally, right? Because, we're transcending the wealth of our parents.
Yeah.
So we, at some point, we're taking care of kids as we're also taking care of parents, and not in the sense of caretaking, just caretaking, but like literally financially. How do you do that, right? And still, and still have to compete with your peers, right? To produce top-notch scholarship, to be the teacher that you need to be in the classroom, right? And all of those things.
Professor Bradley only goes so far. Like, when I go back to Albany, it's still just Gina Mae.
Yeah.
They still like, you was that tall, lanky yellow girl that we went to school with, and you was one time you about to fight that one girl because she took your date to the 8th grade prom. We still know who you are, right? Like, and like you said, like family stuff, and just finding a way to do all of that. And I sometimes prayer, like I don't know how else to explain it. I'm still trying to figure that out, because not only, it's a different struggle bus when you're adjuncting. That's one thing, like how you gonna keep the lights on. Right. It's a totally different struggle bus when you're like, okay, I'm kind of keeping the lights on, but I'm also kind of trying to help whoever, because you're also dealing with, that survivor's remorse. That's one of the reasons that I rep so hard for Albany, is because, like, we've had this conversation, but like Albany's not supposed to make it.
Right.
If you black in Albany, like, we have the highest unemployment rate in not even in the state, but also we're like 3rd in the nation. There's a reason that they call Albany the trap. Right. Like, you literally have people with U-Hauls on graduation who are either getting ready to go to boot camp or getting the hell out of Dodge because they know if they stay, right, that's it. You know what I'm saying? And I stayed because I went to Albany State. I made it. Like some days I'm like, what the hell was so special about me that I made it? That somebody else who was way smarter, way just doing all these other things, right? And I feel like that's something particularly interesting for the rural South, is when you come from the rural South, it's not just you. It's not just Dr. Bradley or, Gina May. It's me. You're putting on for everybody else. The interesting conundrum that I find myself in now is, how do we balance self-care, first of all, because if I go down, how are we going to keep this up? That's that survivor's, guilt. And you don't even have to have a PhD to feel that.
Between you and Joycelyn Wilson, I've had probably 247 conversations over the last decade, chiding those of us who have certain kind of bourgeois standards around hip hop and think that the world, circulates around
gatekeepers.
What happened in the Bronx and Queens, in Brooklyn, right? Because the world starts with Rakim, ends with Jay-Z.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So because of folks like you and Joycelyn and that little 15-year-old there sitting down there, I've had to think differently about Southern hip hop, right? So, I got some love for Yachty and Migos and,
Oh, that's mostly the 15-year-old.
Right,
I don't be telling you listen to no Yachty. See, that's not me. Don't.
So let me ask you this question, right? Because I know you often talk about the hegemony of New York and LA and other parts in the country in relationship to the Black South. So when I listen to Migos, right, and you're going to have to roll with me this for a while, and I've been waiting 6 months to ask you this question. When I listen to Migos, what I hear in sort of their accent is not American.
Oh, yeah, no.
I hear maybe Ghanaian. I'm going to take you someplace, right?
Oh, we taking a journey? All right, come on here.
I'm hearing maybe Ghanaian, maybe Nigerian. I'm not hearing Southern American, right? And, you do your little Google things of where they come from. It's like, they're from Georgia. Okay,
they from Gwinnett.
Yes, they grew up in Georgia. Right, how did they get to Georgia? That's my question, right? And of course, we're at a moment where it's not unusual to think that like there might be 100,000 Canadians like in Atlanta, right? Just from immigration, right? So, but my question is, listening to Akon earlier, let's assume for a moment they do have Ghanaian lineage.
Okay.
Father, grandfather, whatever. Why choose to represent themselves as the South as opposed to Ghanaian? And if that's the case, does that not speak in this particular moment to a Southern hegemony of the Black South?
Oh man, now you get into the global South. You know what I'm saying? And that's the...
because even Jay-Z had to roll with UGK. Let me tell you
something. Since you're going there, let's go there. All right, listen here. So before Jay-Z came out with that Big Pimpin' joint, he was all New York everything. He was starting to fall off. Let's be 100. But when UGK came out with the Big Pimpin',
boom, boom, boom,
they're like, who would he do?
Boom, 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 boom.
They resuscitated. They resuscitated what Hov meant to hip hop. They was like, oh, so he can travel, right? In ways that New York hip hop don't travel.
True that.
Okay, gatekeeper. I'm just making sure.
True that. True that.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I love having these conversations with like you and Joan, because Joan be ready to come after me. Joan Morgan. And she started talking to me to the patois, and I'll be like, okay, I know I went too far. I'm sorry. But yeah, so one of the conversations that I'm trying to grapple with now is, when did we stop having to affiliate with the South? Because in the 90s, you know what I mean, there was like a hyper awareness of where you were from. Like that was part of the canon, you know what I'm saying? Like you would have like a Nas talking about Queensbridge, you know what I'm saying? You would hear what that sounded like. And then you get to, an Outkast in 94, and they giving you landmarks in Atlanta.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We're going to East Point. We're going to Campbellton Road. We're going to Decatur. We're going to Lithonia. And you're just like, oh, so like that hyper attention to geography was amplified in such a way because, one, we didn't have social media. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to just pick up and do whatever I want, right? Like when the first time I heard Panda, I was like, what the hell is Future talking about? Some pants? Like, I had to, and then they're like, nah, it's this dude from New York.
Right.
And I'm like, designers from New York?
Well, it's like the debate we had about Fetty Wap. That ain't trap music.
That ain't trap. Listen, don't get me started up on this stage. Okay. I legit need to get like a trap purist shirt because, I mean, because, you know what I'm saying? For me, trap was Atlanta. It was drug culture in Atlanta. It was Bankhead, not to be confused with Buckhead. And I'm like, but here is Fetty Wap coming out of New Jersey. And I'm like, why, with Trap Queen, what the hell is that? What that mean? Ain't no love making in the trap. Ain't no love notes in the trap. But I mean, like that song, you know, you was like, I love that song. And then y'all came after me. I'm not gonna forget that either. You and Joan and Guthrie and all them. But yeah, I mean, like the way that music allows these particular hinges of identity to float in the way that they do now as compared to when Outkast was coming out. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so is it a bad thing now that we don't know where hip-hop comes from?
No, I don't think so. I feel like other folks have already done the work. Like, you know what the South is, you know what New York is, you know what the West Coast is, you know what the Midwest is. And now, you know, this younger generation of cats who's out here producing and making music, they can just pick and choose in ways that other groups couldn't pick and choose. Like, one of the questions that I grapple with is, would Outkast have been as prominent and as iconic as they were when they first came out if Organized Noise didn't pull from funk and blues and all these other Southern aesthetics? If they did, like, you know, they talked about like crate digging in New York, you know what I'm saying? Right. But you also heard like that influence of like Brick, for example, with Sleepy Brown's dad. Like you heard that. You heard the falsetto of a Curtis Mayfield that Sleepy Brown tried to emulate. It was distinctively Southern. But if they didn't do that work, would we still be trying to find out what the South can do? Yeah. Right? So when you think about like Amigos and they talking about like they trying to be, I think they said they're more iconic than Outkast. So of course the old heads like myself is like, don't do that, right? But I mean, like they have done really interesting things with like the legit delivery of how they deliver. Like folks have bitten how they deliver their lyrics. And you're just like, okay. But also what's interesting is that they reflect how Atlanta has developed in the last 10, 15 years. Like, Gwinnett County is big, you know what I'm saying? But if you were talking to folks, they're like, Gwinnett ain't Atlanta. It's really not. It's like North, the North, as they say. And it's like Decula, where my best friend lives. Is, you know, all of these other places that aren't Atlanta proper. Right. Which is the reason that, you know, some like the show Atlanta is so dope, right? Like one of the things that was so brilliant that Donald Glover did was he put you in Atlanta, and if you weren't familiar with Atlanta before the Real Housewives, before reality television, before all of these things, he didn't put Peachtree anywhere in there, right? He made sure that Paperboy was a trap artist who was still in the trap. Yeah. Right. Completely different Atlanta. Right. To the point where folks were like, but that's not Atlanta. One, and two, well, I thought Donald Glover just did Community. What happened? He seems so melancholy. He seems so, and folks, and especially Southern black folks is like, yeah, that's real life right there. That's real shit right there. Right.
We still trying to figure out why he come home from Princeton.
Yeah, we like, what happened? What happened?
Because we know those stories, right? We know cats who go away and like they just show up again. There's like there's no story about why you home.
We was like, brother, I thought you went to the Ivy League. We put you in the black newspaper. You supposed to be gone. You was in your grandmama said, your auntie said, right? Dr. McInnes is laughing because we have this conversation all the time. Because his grandma is still like, we still need to put it in the paper. Because now he's a professor at Duke. So that deserves the big picture on the front page of the black newspaper. Right? So, I mean, like, there are questions. There's a reason that the second season in Atlanta, second season is called the Robin season. That's so trap. I can't wait. I need to know. I have questions. Like when why did he come back, right? So like one of my favorite episodes, and actually we're watching Atlanta in my Outcast class the last day of class, like, because we're doing it back to back. So we're watching the Juneteenth joint.
Right.
And, you know, the guy, I'm like, I thought this was just so brilliant, and it was so subtle, because, you know, the professor or whatever, the white guy was like, so, you know, why haven't you tried to find your roots? And Ern was like, because I'm broke as fuck. And I'm like, true, right? When you think about, like, the joy and the frenzy around Black Panther, I done been twice. I'm going again on Friday. I am. And it's like, I mean, like, you know, Thursday I had just finished class, you know what I'm saying? So I went incognito up in there. So it was like, you know, I had on my usual, you know, whatever. And then Saturday I went with the squad. So that's when I had to get cute, you know what I'm saying? I had to put the sew-in back in, you know what I'm saying? I had to get the shirt, had my Wakanda South shirt, my, you know, my African print, wax print, I was cute. I got receipts. And then, you know, next week I gotta find a different outfit, so I'm probably gonna wear the white dashiki dress, cause you don't wear the same shit twice to the same movie. And I ain't even going to the movie in the same state. Like, I'm going to be in Texas. So I'm like, I need me a separate outfit for Texas, because, you know, Texas fly. It's kind of like the same thing. Like, you know, one of the reasons that I find Black Panther so, I mean, it's just gorgeous. Like, I cried twice, right? I mean, like, I knew what was coming the second time, and my husband, like, nudging me, like, really, though? Like, we saw this, like, 2 days ago, and you over here just boo-hoo crying, right? I'm like, but it's just such a deep moment when he's, you know, I'm not going to spoil it. I ain't going to say what he said, but, you know, you're welcome. I'm not going to say, but I'm just like, right? But I mean, like, it's kind of like the same thing. Like, you know, folks are like, well, you know, why are folks so excited about Black Panther? It's the same reason that folks were excited about Atlanta, is because they are bringing a marginalized perspective to the mainstream. Like, you were talking about Migos earlier, you know what I'm saying? Nobody was checking for Migos until Donna Glover said,
right.
you know, I love that song, Bad and Bougie.
Awards,
and folks was like kind of trying to be slick with it and be like, Bad and Bougie, right? And then all of a sudden, I mean, like, Bad and Bougie had been out in Atlanta for like months. And then all of a sudden, this brand new song, Bad and Bougie by the Migos. And I'm just like, y'all Columbus and asses. Like, we've been at this for how long? You know, folks love the Columbus, the South. Like, so the other example that I give is like Lil Jon and the East Side Boy. Everybody know who Lil Jon is, right? Lil Jon and the East Side Boys just come to Albany and do the back to school concert for free. You know, T.I. came to Albany as T.I.P. Right. And the first time I heard Tip was on the remix of this group co-ed called Roll With Me. And then everybody's like, oh, but then when he comes out with Urban Legend, they're like, oh my God, there's this guy named T.I. And folks in Georgia is just like, we been on this cat. So, I mean, it's just really fascinating, like, the rediscovering that mainstream does and how that repackages what they think Southernness does and does not do. It's just fascinating for me. And the other thing I want to say, too, is, so, you know, everybody who know me know that I have an unhealthy obsession with Andre 3000. My husband knows it, right? I mean, like, for real, like, when they came to Atlanta and for our anniversary, my brother got us the VIP tickets or whatever, so we, like, front row. And Outkast comes out, and I'm just like, Outkast, right? And so, like, they're like, we need folks to volunteer to be, you know, when Andre does, hey, ya. So my husband, let me see your arm. My husband was like, you go up there, you coming back single. And I was like, let's see, the possibility of running off with Andre or my marriage. Well, I'm still married, by the way. So, I mean, like, but it's interesting how folks try to extract people from the South. Yeah. Andre's not Southern per se. I mean, he played Jimi Hendrix. Nah, that man is still Southern. Talk to him. Just talk to him one good time. And you'd be like, yup, there it is. In the same way when you talk, if you hear Big Boy talk, that Savannah come out of him all day, every day. But there's this need there's this need by folks to decenter the southernness of them because they're smart or they're creative or they're talented in ways that you can't do that with me. You can't separate the South from me. You can't. You just can't. It's not the way that I talk. It's what I research. It's what I do. It's what I talk about. And you know, it's important. I feel like that's important. Is that you have these conversations where people try to kind of just like pick and choose. Right? Like they try to pick and choose what parts of the South that they're comfortable with. They try to pick and choose what parts of Southern hip hop that they're comfortable with. I know the chorus to Hey Ya, so I know the South. Nah, not really. You ain't doing that work.
Tell me the chorus to West Savannah.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Tell me the chorus to, you know, Claiming True. Tell me the chorus to, you know, a mixtape. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, there's this assumption that, oh, because I know X, Y, and Z, then that's what I'm going to do. Of course, you know, I study the civil rights movement, so of course I know everything about the contemporary South. Nah, not really, because you're not talking about how hip-hop in the South, the genesis point of hip-hop in the South is the civil rights movement. You can't get away from that in Southern hip-hop in ways that you can in New York or in L.A. or in Chicago. But yet you saying that the contemporary Black South is still rooted in civil rights, but you're not talking about how that has expanded and rooted out into the musical and to the literary artistic endeavors of what contemporary Southern Black folks are doing. So if people try to tell me they know the South, I'm like, I need receipts, right? And it's really fascinating to me which South they try to represent. And then I'm gonna shut up because it makes me mad. So Jesmyn Ward wrote the gorgeous ass book, Sing Unburied Sing. Jesmyn is bad. She bad. And something about Mississippi folks. Like, I don't know. Yeah, Mississippi.
Two National Book Awards?
You know what I'm saying? Writing about poor ass Mississippi, Black Mississippi.
And looking as pretty as all whatever.
She knows she fine. She knows she fine. And, you know, Kiese Layman up in here. And Kiese Layman writing about being poor, Black, and vulnerable in Mississippi. Right, that vulnerable Black masculinity that folks refuse to talk about, right? And John Jennings is drawing out these beautiful comic illustrations about this is what it means to create a Black South from a Black Southern perspective.
Our generation's Aaron Douglas.
Come through, John Jennings, come through. That's my friend, that's my friend, that's my cousin. And when I see like folks are trying to interpret what they're trying to do, they are always searching for a white framework. And I'm like, how you trying to frame something with white folks when white folks ain't the center of that to begin with? Like Jesmyn Ward ain't talking about white folks in Sing Unburied Sing. You have one white character who is secondary to what's actually going on, but yet people want to be like, well, you know, she's taking up the throne of William Faulkner.
It's Faulkner-esque.
Faulkner-esque. It's Faulkner. Faulkner, damn it. And I'm sitting here like...
Flannery O'Connor, right?
Yeah. And I'm sitting here like, okay, first of all, you really didn't read Jesmyn Ward because Jesmyn Ward puts Black people, poor, Southern, rural Black people on a pedestal. William Faulkner talks about poor, Southern, rural Black people in passing. There is a difference, and it really pisses me off to no end when folks try to contextualize contemporary Southern Black art with non-contemporary white Southern artists. And I know it hurts people's feelings, especially in Southern studies. They're like, oh, but you have to include a Faulkner in conversations about the Black South. No, you really don't. You really don't need to include white folks in conversations about the Black South because guess what? Black folks wasn't part of the conversations in the white South to begin with because when you do put us in them conversations, it's usually as slaves or as maids or as indentured servants or whatever the hell you want to do to make you feel better about Black people being in that conversation. And Southern Black folks is like, no, we're not just slaves or whatever. We be at the juke joint. We be talking about all these other intellectual things that have otherwise been overlooked because you feel like because you don't know what the fuck we talking about, That's not Southern studies. Get out of here, man. See, okay, I'm sorry. Just get out of here. Get out of here.
Mentors and 3 or 4 inspirational people. Right.
1, David Eichert, because David Eichert is just as gangster. Right, he from North Kakalaki. So again, I run with the Southern squad. I guess it depends on what part of mentoring. So like as far as creative writing mentoring is concerned, definitely Kiese Lehman, Jasmine Ward have been wonderful. Academic mentors, you know, Dr. Neal, David Eichert, Imani Perry. I love me some Imani Perry. She's the tenderest gangster you've ever met, right? Those are like my go-to. I know those are like my go-to people that I talk to. But I also have like my sister squad. So, you know, Treva Lindsay, again, is wonderful. Bettina Love is amazing. John Jennings, just anything talking about, you know, the South in general. I just bounce my ideas off of him, and he's like, that's great, or think about this. It goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier about you need multiple mentors. Like, that's something that I wish that those coming up in graduate school now would understand. You need multiple mentors for different things that you're trying to do. So it's like you need a mentor for the job market. You need a mentor for your actual research area. You need a mentor for if you're trying to, you know, balance that thin line between public intellectualism. You need to reach out to these folks who you see doing something similar to what you're trying to do. You can't be scared to do that. They might say no. I mean, like, folks are busy. They got their own things going on, but at least you put forth that effort to be like, you know, and also don't just come at folks like, you know, I just want to pick your brain. I hate that. Yeah. Come with me with some direct questions. What do you want to know? How do you write a book proposal? How do you talk to somebody in publishing? How do you approach the job market in your job letter? Like, be as specific as you can. And even if you get bounced down or like, I can't help you, then the next question you should be like, well, can you point me in a direction to somebody who might be able to assist me because you're not available at this time?
And
right?
it's funny because, you know, if you find a generous spirit in general, but if you find a generous spirit in the academy, it's someone who themselves had been in contact with a generous spirit. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Robin Kelly had written 12 letters for me, right, had blurbed 2 of my books, and he had never laid eyes on me. Mm-hmm. For like 7 years.
Right, right.
And so when I asked him about it, like, you know, why do you do this? And he's like, well, because when I was a grad student and folks didn't want to believe that I could be a historian, it was Nell Irvin Painter, mm-hmm, right, who responded to his letters and told him what to read. And so you realize that's how we sustain this, right? Definitely. We sustain this by thinking that we're always part of a community, that there are folks who are generous in this, both generative in the work they do, but also generous in their spirit, right? And mm-hmm, that's one of the reasons why we ride, right? Right, because you roll that way.
Right. I mean, like, and then somebody else also want to shout out is Dr. Guthrie Ramsey. That's like my music writing mentor, right? Like Dr. Guy, that's my guy. I mean, like, I can just text him and be like, yo, I'm trying to think about this. And you know, and I also, you know, email Mark. I email Mark about like everything. I'll be like, okay, listen, I'm thinking about this. What you think? And usually I get like a 2-word response like, that's cool, or go with it. But I know when he calls me, it's real. So I'm like, okay, he never calls me unless it's serious, right? But I also think too, like, you know, thank God for social media. I feel like the opportunity to network is so much easier now than it was 10, 15 years ago, right? Like you talked about Robin being able to write letters, like probably like literally write letters in ways now that I could just be like, let me shoot off this email. Let me reach out to somebody on Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I hope I answered your question. Like that's who I ride with. So, you know, thank you to Mark and Imani and Guthrie, and I'll never call him David. It's always gonna be Doc.
So there's this new book out called Chocolate Cities. It's Andrea Robinson and Mark. But one of the things that was really striking for me is their argument that, right, everywhere south of Canada is really the South. Substantiating, right, like that claim through this exploration of the historical, cultural, like connections, right, across these regions. We've been having this conversation about how now hip-hop artists, right, are able to kind of pluck from wherever they are because of our openness of channels of communication, that what they seem to be arguing is that, like, there's that thread that's been there kind of all along, right, in terms of our, yeah, like, Black folks, like, gathering and taking and sampling, not just in hip hop, right, but in other sorts of spaces. So I'm just curious, right, about your thoughts of those ideas.
Yeah. So, you know, first and foremost, so I love me some Zandria Robinson. I feel like she's the Zora of our generation. I really feel like she's the Zora Neale Hurston of our generation. The way that she makes, you know, these sociological theories accessible. She knows how to tell a story. She's the Zora. She's the Zora, and I love her. I just want to say that first. But yeah, so I mean, like, you know, I think it was Malcolm X who was like, everywhere below Canada is the South. What I do appreciate about Chocolate Cities, because I'm still making my way through it also, is I like how they reinterpret the different notions of what the South is. And I'd like to agree with that. I mean, like, you know, somebody else that I also think about is, you know, the warmth of other suns. And we have these conversations about how people left the South, but we also need to start having these conversations about how folks are coming back South, right? And, you know, thinking about what that means in terms of Southern Black identities, the idea, and this is something that I grapple with in chronicling Stankonia, is one of the reasons that Outkast is so dope is they continuously evolve away from a physical region of Southernness, right? And I say that's Southness, right? Into Southernness, which is a conceptualization of what Southern identities can be. So it's like, you know, again, with Southern Playalistic, it's Atlanta-centric, right? And then you get to like an ATLians, and they're playing around with this idea of what would Black folks look like in space? And not just space. I mean, like, they also literally move Atlanta to the coast of Georgia, where Savannah is supposed to be. So that's like paying respect to Big Boy's roots, or his roots in Savannah. And then with Aquemini, they completely destroy all of that, all the notions of the South, right? I mean, like, if you actually listen to the title track, he's like, you know, the sun goes down, heroes eventually die. He's talking about, well, at least I argue that he's talking about the end of this kind of romantic notion of the civil rights movement. And what does that leave us? And then you get to something like the Art of Storytelling Part 2. And he's like, meet me at the center of the earth, because he's writing the last rhyme, like the end of days, right? And then when you get to Stankonia, what is the first thing that they say on that album? Live from the center of the earth. So this completely reconceptualization of world building of the South. And they do that with their music in ways that Zandria and Marcus are playing around with in sociology, right? So I appreciate the complications of what Southernness means. And then, you know, also shouting out Dr. McInnes and his idea of, you know, the afterlife of the plantation, right? Because usually what happens is, I mean, it's brilliant. Well, he knew I know he's brilliant. I love him. But, you know, this understanding that we still try to attach ourselves to the South in this linear way, like this happened, but you can't do that with the South, because we always are revisiting history. I mean, look at what's happening in Durham right now with the trials about the Confederate statues, right? This conversation about what does Confederate statues mean? Where should they be? Folks getting in their feelings that they're getting torn down. Folks getting in their feelings about a Confederate flag. And folks are like, no, we're talking about heritage. But what you're not talking about is the slavery is the institution upon which that heritage was built. You don't want to talk about that. We're always revisiting that, right? Revisiting that conceptualization. And what Dr. McInnes talks about with the afterlife of the plantation is, how does the plantation function as a space of reckoning for not only Southern Black folks, but just Southernness in general? Like, you have to reckon with that. Like, I mean, like, it is still a tourist economy. People still get married at the plantation. We're going to go get married at the plantation. We're going to spend a weekend at this plantation. You're just like, oh, so you're just going to randomly just, I'm going to just go spend some time there. And I'm like, nah, I just can't do that. You know, we talked about ancestors at the beginning. What would my ancestors say? They'd be like, hold on, let me talk to you over here for a minute. You really going to go spend time, just relaxation time, at this traumatic, historical, cultural, social, economic space, right? So what I think is really dope and what's starting to happen is that in the academy you have like a squad of scholars who are like, we need to just completely erase all these conversations we're having about the South because we need to reinvent, we need to renegotiate, we need to come and revisit these things because they're not working. And that's something that Chocolate Cities does, right? And that's something that I hope that I get to kind of contribute whenever the hell I finish this book. So, yeah, so that's what I kind of think about that. But thank you for your question, Danielle.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.